Grand Canyon, one of the most beautiful places in the world, I have to believe. Also some very mysterious stuff going on here.
Yeah, well, let's get into it. Starting off our list today, we have the Great Unconformity, a strange geological phenomenon which has left scientists baffled for decades. You see, the Grand Canyon was formed over millions of years as the Colorado River cut through the Colorado Plateau, eroding the plateau, which is made up of 3 main rock layer sets, which each contain various layers of sediment within them. Each small layer in the walls of the canyon can be dated, and for the most part it's pretty consistent, until of course the Proterozoic layer suddenly jumps to meet the layer formed from the Tappets sandstone. There is a unconformity between the two, and by that I mean that the Proterozoic layer, also known as the ancient Vishnu schist, dates back to over 1.7 billion years ago, and the next layer of sandstone only dates back to approximately 525 million years ago, meaning that there is a significant amount of rock layers missing from the geological record. And the missing layers represent a major part of Earth's history, so scientists cannot figure out a reason as to why they wouldn't be there. It's inexplicable and a total mystery.
One of the creepiest discoveries made in the Grand Canyon? Bones. Human bones. Something that happens pretty often apparently. The amount of deaths that have happened here are almost impossible to count, let alone solve all of these cases. There have been tons of human remains found in the Grand Canyon that have never been identified. And some have been identified, but the circumstances of their deaths have never been solved. In 2005, the Cold Case Squad was formed in Coconino County with the sole purpose of solving as many of these cases as they could. The members of the unit are all volunteers, having expertise in careers like the FBI, the Department of Public Safety Crime Lab, forensic nursing, crime scene investigations, National Park Service law enforcement, and more. And some of these cases they're looking into go all the way back to 1955.
From bones to no bones, another great mystery of the Grand Canyon, America's greatest canyon, is a distinct lack of not only rock layers but also dinosaur bones. That's right, despite its ancient origins, dinosaur bones have yet to be found within the rocks of the Grand Canyon. While at first this seems like it could possibly be one of the world's greatest mysteries, there is actually an explanation as to why no dinosaur fossils or bones exist in the area. And that is because while the canyon itself likely does not predate the dinosaurs, the rocks in which the canyon was carved from do. In fact, in some instances, the rocks in the canyon are billions of years older than the oldest recorded dinosaurs. So while the lack of dinosaur fossils isn't necessarily unexplainable, it's still pretty interesting.
Next up, we have the story of the cursed blanket. The story goes that in the spring of 1879, a trader named Don McGuire crossed the Colorado River on his way back to Utah. He'd been finishing up a trading trip in northern Arizona. At the ferry, he met a woman named Emma Lee, who was running the ferry. She needed some of McGuire's goods, and in exchange, she offered him a beautiful Navajo blanket. But according to her, the blanket had a bit of a dark history. Emma told him after they made their trade that her late husband's luck had taken a turn for the worse as soon as he got the blanket. Not sure why she'd say this after having just made a trade. Wouldn't really sell me on it, but I guess, you know, a trade's a trade. It was too late. McGuire wasn't superstitious anyway though, and didn't believe in any kind of curse. But in the end, McGuire would end up writing that the blanket was a, quote, curse to all who possess it. His luck started getting bad. He began chronicling all his bad fortune, writing that he had suffered, quote, 100 calamities. But as soon as he lost the blanket, his bad luck seemed to stop. He ended up digging further into the history of the blanket and discovered it had been woven by a Navajo woman named Mariana, who had made it for a stranger who rode into town that she had fallen in love with. Only her daughter had also fallen in love with the man. The stranger didn't return either of their feelings though, and the daughter ended up dying, according to the tale, of a broken heart. In a form of revenge, Mariana ended up cursing the blanket, and 3 months later, the stranger's horse was found with an empty saddle, and the blanket was found hanging on a tree branch, stained red.
Next up, we have the fact that the bottom layer of the Grand Canyon, located just below the Proterozoic layer, is made up entirely of metamorphic basement rocks, which are rocks found in the common household basement. Just kidding. They are rocks classified by their igneous intrusions, which means that either magma or lava has either entered and cooled or cooled on top of previously formed rock. This layer of the canyon is referred to as Zoroaster granite. The reason for the existence of the metamorphic rock is the Unicaret volcanic field, which was the source of at least 150 lava flows that poured into the Grand Canyon. Pretty hot stuff.
The story of Robert Spangler is absolutely wild. How this guy got away with everything he did is pretty astonishing. Every woman who ended up marrying this guy mysteriously died. Mysteriously. One of which at the Grand Canyon. So on April 11th, 1993, Robert Spangler walked into a ranger station at the Grand Canyon to report that his wife, Donna Sundling, had fallen to her death. He said that they had paused to take a picture on the trail, and when he turned back, she was gone. Rangers found Sundling's body about 160 feet below the trail. Her death was ruled an accident. Spangler was never formally accused of causing it, well, at least not for a while. But even though there was no way to definitively prove that Spangler was responsible for his wife's death, it was highly suspicious because 15 years prior to this, Spangler had another wife and a family, all of whom were found dead in their suburban Denver home in 1978. Spangler had managed to make it look like his wife had killed their two youngsters before taking her own life. So after his third wife had accidentally fallen to her death, Spangler started contacting his second wife again, Sharon. She ended up moving back into his home in Colorado, and on October 2nd, 1994, Spangler claimed that he'd found Sharon unresponsive in their house next to a bottle of Tylenol. She died later that day, and Spangler just happened to receive a $20,000 payout from Sharon's life insurance policy after her death. In 2000, Spangler was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he ended up confessing to all his crimes, all except for Sharon. He admitted to killing his first family because he wanted a new life, and he pushed his third wife off a cliff because he was unhappy in his marriage. Because apparently divorce doesn't exist. Anyway, in March of 2001, Robert Spangler was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes, but his cancer took him out 5 months later.
Next on our list today, we have the Hydes, or more accurately, the disappearance of Glen and Bessie Hyde, who went missing in the fall of 1928. The pair were newlyweds, hoping to run the rapids of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in Arizona, making Bessie Hyde the first woman to accomplish the feat. Unfortunately, that never happened, because on December 19th of 1928, the couple's boat was found abandoned, floating upright and fully stocked in the river. The pair had been seen and photographed just a month prior to their boat turning up unmanned in the cold water of the canyon. They had been restocking on goods and supplies when Bessie was overheard wondering aloud if she would ever wear pretty shoes again. Well, there is no way of knowing if she ever did, because as far as conclusive evidence goes, the pair was never found. Although many years later, in 1971, a woman claiming to be Bessie Hyde stated that she had killed her husband Glen in order to escape his tormenting behaviors. While there was some evidence to back up her claim, documents of Glen's early life, which would have been pretty easily obtainable, and a weapon, the woman's story is widely deemed as just that, a story. The investigation of the Hyde's death led to the discovery of many bodies found within the Grand Canyon, but none of them actually belonged to the Hydes themselves. Theories about the Hyde's disappearance range from people believing them to have drowned in the river to believing that they were chopped apart by tribes living in the canyon. At this point, it's looking like we'll never really know.
Well, how could I not involve a big hairy ape monster on a list of scary discoveries? Yes, even the Grand Canyon is known for a mysterious creature. Arizona has its own version of Bigfoot, known as the Mogollon Monster, or simply the Arizona Bigfoot. Sightings have been reported all throughout the state, but the oldest report dates back to 1903 in the Grand Canyon. The Arizona Republican newspaper came out with a story about a man named I.W. Stevens, who'd had a horrifying encounter with a big, hairy creature near the canyon. He described it as having, quote, long white hair and a matted beard that reached to his knees. It wore no clothing, and upon his talon-like fingers were claws at least 2 inches long. So he'd come across this bizarre creature drinking the BLOOD of 2 cougars, and when the creature spotted him, it threatened him with a club and, quote, screamed the wildest, most unearthly screech.
Next up, we have one of the deadliest airline disasters in American history, which somehow occurred directly over the Grand Canyon and cost the lives of 128 passengers. The freak accident occurred on the morning of June 30th in 1956. Just 1 hour after departing from the Los Angeles International Airport, United Airlines Flight 718 and Trans World Airlines Flight 2 collided in midair above the Grand Canyon. Both pilots had somehow veered off of their designated routes and ended up flying at the exact same altitude in the exact same space at the exact same time. The reasons behind the crash were listed as lack of communication, turbulent weather, and flight rules. However, given the large number of coincidences that led to the accident, the crash of Flight 718 and Flight 2 out of LA hold an air of undeniable mystery.
Finally, we have the Thunderbird, a creature from Native American folklore. Giant birds with 20-foot wingspans, creating lightning storms as they flap their powerful wings. There have been reports of massive-sized birds flying over Arizona, though, especially around the Grand Canyon, some in quite recent years. One of the most famous stories, though, dates back to the late 1800s, when 2 cowboys in Tombstone claimed to have shot down one of these massive birds. The story goes that the cowboys were riding through the desert when they spotted this enormous bird perched on a rocky outcrop. They fired at it, as cowboys do, and eventually they brought the bird down. They managed to transport it back to Tombstone, where it was then displayed in a local shop for everyone to gawk at for a while. Again, that's not the only story. Over the years, many people have reported seeing giant birds in the skies over Arizona. Some describe them as having feathers and resembling oversized condors, while other people have said they've seen what looks more like some sort of prehistoric creature, like a pterodactyl. Well, another place to add to the list. Take a trip down to the Grand Canyon, catch a glimpse of a big, hairy monster with a club, a big bird in the sky, and you know, just have a grand old time.
Try not to die.
We'll catch you in the next video.